This is one of Jesus's fairly famous parables. And of course, it's one he chooses to interpret for us. Although the lectionary doesn't really tell you this, but there's a little bit more in between him giving the parable and him explaining the parable. They just cut that. So, given that Jesus explains it and interprets it, I defer to that. Funny enough, I defer to the Son of God's interpretation of his own words. That said, with, I guess, a little bit of humorous and a lot of humility, the gift of a good story is you can kind of plunk it out there and walk around it, looking at it from different vantage points, and maybe hearing something different in it. And so I wonder if that isn't part of the invitation of Jesus' parables. So with a lot of humility and I guess enough hubris to do it, here we go. A sower went out to sow something. So the first question is about the seed, right? I mean, obviously it's the gospel in some capacity, that Jesus Christ came into the world to fling wide the truth that love has come, right? That Jesus Christ, the Son of God, has been born as a human and will die and will rise again so that humans never have to be separated from God again. It's an incredible amount of joy and hope and love to fling forth into the world, right? The gospel is the seed that the sower throws. But of course, the other side to the gospel, it's not the other side, I guess, it's the same thing. But Jesus says in another place, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and cracks open, you don't actually get the stalk or the head or the harvest. That the gospel is good news and it's truth, it's all of those things, and we're not always living in accord with it. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself here. But there are things in our lives that are not always quite as they should be. And a true confrontation with grace reminds us that there are things that we do, or mindsets that we have, or false stories we believe about ourselves or about our neighbors that sometimes need to crack open in order for the good news to actually bring a harvest into our lives. And sometimes that's difficult. And then you're into the seed, the gospel, the hope, the good news, the transformative power of the Spirit that comes with some kind of breaking open, falls on all kinds of different soils. And I think because it can be difficult to hear sometimes, it affects how the soil receives the good news. And of course, Jesus spends a lot of time in his interpretation talking about the soil. And I think there's been a time where we kind of string ourselves out about what soil am I? Am I being choked up by the weeds? Is it the rocks? Who am I? Except maybe we're all of the soils, because we all go through different seasons of life that bring us different things. There are those seasons of life where we're busy. The weeds are kind of growing, right? And they're all not important. They matter. There's all these things that distract us. And some of them are really positive things. We want to be good spouses and partners. We want to be good children to our aging parents. We want to be good parents to our growing children. We want to be a good cat owner. We want to be sure that we're not letting our colleagues down at work. And all of these things. How will I afford to pay for college? That's a little weed over here. And how will I help pay for the care my parents need? That's over here. It's a lot of stuff. We just get distracted. And it's not that the gospel isn't important in our lives, it's just that there's a lot of stuff growing. And it's hard to see. But I think then, the other season of our life that sometimes comes is the rocky ones. And some of us are born on rocky soil. Things are not easy for us in that family of origin. And for some of us, we move into the cycle of rocky soil. We lose the job, we don't get into the college we wanted, we flunk out the master's program, or the person we love most in this world, for whatever reason, isn't in our life anymore. And the hope that we used to have, and the faith and the joy and the delight of God and life, it's a little bit withery, because the rocks are a lot and the sun seems to be just drying us up. Then there are those seasons of life where we know who we are, and we know what we're doing. We know what the truth is. And our politics is correct, and our opinions are right, and we could solve that problem for everyone if they would just tell us what it is, and we're like a packed down path. We have got all the answers, and any seed of truth just goes pa-ting and bounces straight off. We are not receptive. We are hard and sealed in our ways, and ain't no gospel truth gonna penetrate that packed down soil. But then I think there are other seasons where life opens us. It's an easier moment, that season of life. Joy comes more easily, and when the word comes to us that there's something in our life that's not quite right, we're actually ready to hear it. And it falls into receptive soil, and something new cracks open in us. The words to that hymn, the conversation with that friend, the moment of quiet peace, the seed falls. And it begins to crack open and it begins to grow. And in some times of our lives, it grows 30-fold. And in some times of our lives, it's just so life-changing, it's 100-fold. And we know God in a totally new way we never imagined. But then we move back. We're a field. And I think, too, sometimes, not to compartmentalize, but the present moment is almost its own little mini bunches of field. You know what I mean? We go to work and it's really difficult and joyless because our boss is maybe not the kindest human on earth, or our coworkers aren't great, and we get grumpy and we get angry about that, and no cup of coffee is going to solve our problem today. And we get in a place where we just can't see, it's rocky. But then when the time is right, we realize, our grumpiness isn't doing us any favors either, and a little seed is sown. But we go home at night and it's all joy because our cat or our dog smiles at us and the goldfish jumps out of its bowl, or our family or our partner or our spouse or our kids bring us joy, and it's growing, it's just blooming everywhere. Different parts of our lives right now can be rocky, can be so full of weeds, or can be open to new growth. Because I think this parable can sound a little bit devastating if we get stuck in the mindset of like, shoot, I'm a permanently rocky soil, there's nothing to do with me. Or, man, I'm so distracted by everything, I run so quickly between things, I don't even know who I am or what I'm doing. It's, of course, never an experience I have. I move very slowly through this life. Right. You see me. But I think the great gift of this parable isn't so much about the soil, but it's about the sower. Because the sower went out to sow, and with great liberality, flung the good news in every direction, on every kind of soil. And I think we can presume, based on annual and biannual sowing seasons, that a sower just didn't go out to sow one time. A sower went out to sow again. A sower went out to sow again, and again, and again, flinging wide the good news of God's love on every kind of soil in the sower's field. And I don't know much about farming, you might have intuited that, but I do know this, as a gardener, you don't just leave the soil by itself, you tend it. I think we'd be naive to think that the sower is just like, well, whatever, that rocky section's not working this year. Perhaps it is that the sower goes and works to tend the rocks that actually make it possible for the ground to open up, that the sower weeds, that the sower hoes the kind of like really rough patch, that we're soil that God is constantly working in. Sometimes we can't fix ourselves. We try and we try and we try, but we can't. The sower tends the soil. And I think that's good news, because God's never selling the field. We belong to God forever. We're God's chosen, delightful creation. And the sower will go out to sow the good news to us again and again and again, no matter what kind of soil we are. And if you consider that Jesus tells this parable, the lectionary leaves it out, but Jesus tells this parable to his disciples who are about to go out and continue Jesus' mission, it's actually about us being the sower as well. Because they're gonna go out and it's not gonna be that fun all the time. There's a lot of stuff about like, well, if that family and house and village doesn't receive you, pick the dust off your shoes and move on. That's easier said than done. The disciples are gonna want people to receive the good news that they give them. But the sower is persistent and patient. And we're called to be as persistent and patient as the sower with other people and with the good news. If you've ever done that gracious, kind thing and then felt like it bit you in the end, or you've ever tried to reconcile with that family member again and again and again and again, or you've tried from a place of your school or your hospital or political office to make a difference and it hasn't worked, then you know what it's like to throw out the good news and feel like it just never takes root. But the sower is persistent. The sower is patient. And we're called not to worry about the kind of soil where we throw the good news. We're called to be as liberal as the sower in all facets of our lives, offering love, offering joy and hope to a world full of as many fields as we are. And so it's a parable that speaks on all kinds of levels. We're the follower and we're the field and we're the soil and we're the sower. We're all of that together. But the sower went out to sow. And love and grace and generosity, they keep being flung into our lives. And whether the story lands for you today and you see yourself in the soils, or you see yourself as needing to pick that bag up and reconsider how you're being the sower, or you just are interested in hearing the good news, may those of us who have ears, let us hear what God is saying to God's people.